Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's story comes from Louisiana in the 1850s, a time when fear traveled faster than truth and rumors carried more weight than law. In those years, people whispered about a young enslaved girl who was blamed for the deaths of 22 women across different plantations, a girl who seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear just as fast. And then one night she vanished completely, without leaving a single footprint behind. Some said she was dangerous. Some said she was cursed. And others believed she was something else entirely. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And make sure to subscribe, because each one of these stories comes from long hours of digging through difficult old records and lost historical accounts that take real work to uncover. The girl arrived on the plantation in a way no one could properly explain, but every detail of that morning stayed burned into the minds of those who saw her. She stood at the edge of the yard barefoot and covered in dust with torn clothes, hanging from her small frame and eyes that looked far older than the rest of her body. The overseer swore he never saw her walking up the road or crossing the fields, and yet there she was standing perfectly still, as if she had been placed there only seconds before. The workers stopped what they were doing because something about her presence felt wrong in a quiet, heavy way that made the air feel thicker and colder. She did not speak, and she did not look afraid. She simply stared at the house with a calmness that felt unnatural, like she already knew everything that waited inside and everything that would happen after she stepped through those doors. The plantation owner questioned her, but she never answered, and instead lifted her head slowly like she was listening to something no one else could hear. From that moment on, people whispered that she did not arrive by foot or by road, but appeared and settled herself on the land the way a shadow forms at dusk without warning and without sound. The first woman was found early in the morning, when the sun was just beginning to rise and the air still carried the cool dampness of night, and nothing about the scene made sense to anyone who rushed to her side. She lay on the packed dirt near the storage shed with her eyes wide open, as if she had seen something that froze her in place, and her body showed no wounds, no struggle, no sign of illness. The workers who discovered her said they felt a strange heaviness around her, like the ground itself had tightened beneath their feet, and even the birds in the nearby trees stayed silent, as if refusing to acknowledge what had happened. The woman had been perfectly healthy the night before, moving through her chores with her usual energy and speaking with the others without any sign of fear or pain. Yet something had changed in the darkness, something no one heard or saw. Those who approached her slowly began stepping back, because the slave girl, who had appeared only days earlier, stood at a distance watching with an expression that revealed nothing, no shock, no sadness, no concern, and her stillness made everyone uneasy. People whispered that the girl had been seen walking near the shed before dawn, but no one could agree on when they saw her or how she moved so quietly that not even the dogs reacted. By noon, the entire plantation buzzed with fear, because this death felt different, unnatural, like a silent force had passed through the night and chosen its target without leaving behind a single mark. Rumors began spreading through the plantation faster than anyone could control, and they moved in quiet, frightened whispers from worker to worker as people tried to make sense of the strange death and the unsettling presence of the girl. No one wanted to speak too loudly because the atmosphere on the land felt tense and heavy, like something was listening from the shadows. Some said the girl had been seen standing under the trees before sunrise, perfectly still, as if she were waiting for something to happen. Others claimed they saw her walking behind the first victim the evening before, though no one could explain how a child so small could move without sound or leave no trace behind. Word traveled to the overseers, who tried to dismiss the talk, but even they glanced over their shoulders more often and kept their hands near their tools, as if expecting something to step out of the dark. At night, workers shut their doors early and kept their lamps burning low because the silence outside felt unnatural, almost suffocating. Every rustle in the grass, every shift of wind made people tense because the rumors no longer felt like gossip, but warnings passed from one pair of trembling lips to another. By the end of the week, the story had grown into something larger and more frightening than a single unexplained death, and people were no longer just afraid of what happened. They were afraid of what might happen next. The girl's sudden transfers from one plantation to another began without explanation, and every move only deepened the fear that followed her. The first owner decided she brought too much unease to the workers, because whenever she walked into a room, conversations died and people stiffened like they felt a cold hand brush the back of their necks. Without warnings or reasons, he had her taken by wagon to a neighboring plantation, but the driver later swore that during the entire trip she did not blink or shift or speak, and he said the air around her felt strangely heavy, like riding beside a storm that had not yet broken. When she arrived, the new plantation owner accepted her reluctantly, hoping she would be quieter and easier to control than the rumors suggested, but the uneasiness returned the moment she stepped onto his land. Workers avoided her and animals backed away from her path with their ears pinned low, as if they sensed something dangerous inside her small, silent frame. Within days, unexplained sickness struck 2 women, and whispers began again, turning the owner's curiosity into dread. He arranged to have her moved once more, this time under the cover of night, but the men escorting her claimed they kept losing sight of her even though she was walking only a few steps ahead of them. Each plantation that received her felt the same shift in the air, the same tightening in the chest, the same certainty that something dark had arrived. No matter where she was sent, the fear always traveled with her, and those who watched her leave each time felt relief wash over them like a breath they had been holding for far too long. The pattern of deaths connected to her presence grew slowly at first, and then all at once until even the most skeptical overseers could no longer pretend it was coincidence. Each time the girl arrived at a new plantation, the atmosphere shifted in a way people struggled to describe, as if the air thickened and the daylight dimmed no matter how bright the sun actually was. Within days, a woman would fall mysteriously ill or be found motionless in a place she had no reason to be, and every time the scene was the same, with no wounds, no signs of struggle, and no explanation the doctors could give. Workers noticed that these deaths always happened after the girl had been seen passing silently through the yard or standing near the fields with her eyes fixed on something far away, something no one else could see. People began tracking her movements in whispers, saying she carried a shadow around her that seemed to stretch farther and darker with each new death. At night, the women slept in groups because no one wanted to be alone in the dark with the sense that something unseen was moving across the floors and walls and settling near anyone who felt fear. When another plantation tried to isolate her by keeping her inside a locked shed, the death still came, this time to a woman in the big house, and the workers said they felt a cold pressure in the air long before anyone found her. The pattern became impossible to ignore because wherever the girl stayed, death followed quietly and without warning, leaving people convinced that the danger did not come from her hands, but from something that walked with her, something she could not or would not control. Attempts to restrain or monitor the girl failed in ways that left even the strongest men unsettled and unsure of what they were dealing with. The first owner tried keeping her inside a small storage room with a single guard standing outside the door, yet throughout the night the guard reported hearing soft footsteps moving inside, even though the girl sat perfectly still whenever he opened the door. Another plantation tried chaining the door from the outside, believing she wandered at night, but the next morning the chain lay on the ground unbroken, and the girl sat in the far corner staring at the wall, as if she had never moved at all. Some overseers attempted to watch her closely during the day, taking turns to follow her from a distance, yet they claimed that no matter how slowly she walked or how directly she moved, she always managed to vanish behind a tree or a doorway and reappear somewhere else without making a sound. Dogs refused to go near her, and horses pulled their reins away as if sensing something wrong around her body. One night, a group of workers gathered their courage and decided to keep her in sight until dawn, yet every time they blinked, she seemed a step closer, even though her feet never made a sound on the dirt. By morning, the men were pale and shaking because the girl never spoke, never reacted, and never resisted, yet somehow no lock, no guard, no plan could truly contain her, and every failed attempt left people more certain that they were trying to hold back something that did not follow the rules of the living. Witness testimonies grew more disturbing with each retelling, and although every person swore they spoke the truth, no two accounts averred perfectly, which made the fear spread even faster. because the only thing consistent was how terrified each witness looked when they described what they saw. Some workers said they often found the girl standing in doorways long before sunrise, her eyes fixed on nothing, as if she were listening to voices drifting through the walls. Yet when they approached her, she would shift her gaze slowly toward them with a calmness that made their stomachs twist. Others swore they saw her walking through the fields at night, even though she was supposed to be locked inside, and they claimed her movements looked strange and too smooth, like she floated just above the soil. A few witnesses insisted her shadow stretched in the wrong direction, even when the moon was high, while others whispered that her reflection never appeared clearly in the wash basin water, as if something blurred her outline. One woman said she heard the girl humming a soft tune that made the hair on her arms rise, because it sounded like a lullaby sung backward in a voice that did not belong to a child. Another claimed the girl spoke her name just once in the middle of the night in a tone so steady and emotionless that she packed her things at dawn and begged the overseer to send her away. Each testimony deepened the unease that clung to the plantations, because whether the details were true or twisted by fear, the look in every witness's eyes made it clear that whatever they saw or heard had carved itself deeply into their memory, leaving them shaken long after the girl was transferred again. The night she was blamed for multiple deaths in a single hour became the turning point, when fear on the plantation reached a level no one had ever experienced before, and even the hardest men refused to speak above a whisper. The sky had been unusually dark, and the wind carried a low moan that seemed to seep into the walls of every building and shake the rafters. People reported seeing her move from one part of the yard to another with unnatural swiftness, yet no footprints marked the ground, and the animals acted as if they could sense a presence that humans could not. Within the span of an hour, 3 women were found dead in different parts of the property, one near the kitchen, another in the fields, and a third inside the main house, and each showed no signs of struggle, no cuts, no bruises, and no obvious cause. Witnesses said they saw the girl standing silently nearby or passing by, without making a sound, her face calm and unreadable, while screams echoed in other parts of the plantation. Panic spread instantly as people realized the deaths were happening so closely together that no human could account for them, and yet everyone who saw her swore the girl was always present in some way, like the scent of a force no one could understand. By the end of that hour, the overseer ordered the workers inside their cabins and barred the doors and windows. But even then, no one dared approach the girl, and whispers ran through the crowd that the night itself had bent around her presence, and that the deaths were only the beginning of something far darker. The search party that went looking for her found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that she had passed through the fields at all, despite the fact that dozens of men combed every corner of the plantation and even ventured into the surrounding woods. They questioned workers who had seen her last and retraced every step they could remember, but every route led to empty ground, as if she had vanished into thin air. Dogs that normally tracked scents refused to follow her trail and instead whimpered nervously at the edges of the search area, and some of the men swore they felt a strange weight on their shoulders or a sudden chill in the air whenever they paused. Lanterns swung in the wind, casting shadows that seemed to move independently, and at night the men reported hearing faint footsteps circling them, though no one was there. Even when they stayed in one spot and called her name, the only reply was the echo of their own voices bouncing back off the trees and walls. Exhaustion and fear overtook the search party, and the more they looked, the more impossible the girl's disappearance seemed. And by the end of the day, everyone involved returned to the plantation pale silent that she had left without leaving a trace, and that never amount of trace searching could ever uncover where she had gone or how she had moved. So freely thrive, so free the world. All the parents. The legends that formed after her disappearance grew larger and darker with each retelling until no one could separate fact from fear, and the story became something that haunted every corner of Louisiana. People whispered about the girl in hushed voices near fireplaces at night, warning children to stay inside and never wander alone, because she could appear anywhere without warning and take lives without leaving a mark. Some claimed they saw fleeting shadows moving just beyond the edge of the fields, or glimpsed a small figure standing at the corner of a road that vanished the moment they blinked. Others spoke of hearing her humming or crying softly in the wind during storms or quiet nights, and every time it coincided with someone falling ill or dying suddenly. Travelers passing through plantations were told to avoid the area, and even long after she vanished, the older generations insisted the land itself remembered her presence, and that anyone who ignored the warnings risked more than just fear. Stories merged with local superstitions, and some believed she had made a pact with a force no one could see, while others thought she had been taken by something beyond the human world and returned only to spread terror. The girl became more than a person. She became a symbol of unexplained death and the unknown, and every whispered story carried a piece of the terror that first gripped the plantations decades before. Even historians and storytellers who tried to document the events admitted that the legend had taken on a life of its own, and that no written record could ever capture the full horror of her presence or the fear she left behind. The long-standing mystery that haunted Louisiana for generations became something that no one could solve, and yet everyone felt its presence lingering over the land and in the minds of those who lived there. Families passed down stories of the girl from parents to children, warning them that she could appear without notice and that her arrival was always followed by death or misfortune. Plantation owners told tales to their workers in hushed tones about how her shadow seemed to linger in empty rooms or at the edge of fields even decades after she disappeared, and how livestock would sometimes react as if sensing her return. Travelers and historians who came seeking answers often left with more questions, because no matter how carefully they searched records or questioned witnesses, the evidence always vanished like smoke in the wind. Some claimed to catch glimpses of a small figure moving silently through the trees, or hear faint cries during storms that reminded them of the stories their grandparents told. Over time, the girl became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that some events cannot be explained by logic or reason, and that fear can imprint itself on a place so deeply it endures across generations. Even today, people in Louisiana speak of her in whispers and caution outsiders that the land still remembers the horrors that unfolded there, and that the mystery of the girl who killed 22 women and vanished without a trace may never be solved, leaving her as a dark shadow on the history of the region. The girl's lasting influence on the communities around her became the 12th and final part of the story, and it was felt in ways that went beyond fear or superstition and into the very behavior of those who lived near the plantations she had visited. People reported that even decades later, children would wake screaming in the middle of the night, describing a small figure with unblinking eyes standing silently in the corner of their rooms. Families avoided certain fields at dusk and would refuse to let servants or workers enter parts of the property that were said to be touched by her presence. Seasonal storms brought whispers of her return, and the locals said that sudden deaths or illnesses during those nights were connected to the lingering shadow she left behind. Travelers passing through the region were warned by neighbors to be cautious and not wander alone, because the land itself seemed to remember her movements and would not allow anyone to enter without feeling her presence. Some claimed that animals would act strangely near the plantations, shying away from areas that were once connected to the girl and refusing to enter barns or fields where her influence was said to linger. Even historians who tried to document her life admitted that the story had grown into something beyond a single person, and that the fear she inspired became woven into the culture and the oral histories of the region. Her name became shorthand for unexplained tragedy, and any time misfortune struck, the area people quietly nodded and whispered that it was her shadow returning. The lasting effect was not only in the stories, but in the cautious way people live their daily lives, the careful steps taken through dark corridors and fields, and the respect mixed with terror they held for a girl who could kill without a sound and vanish without a trace. In this way, her presence endured long after she disappeared, turning her into a living myth and a warning across generations that some darkness cannot be contained or explained, and that the memory of her actions would remain an indelible part of Louisiana history. The legend of the girl took on a life of its own as the 13th part of the story, and it spread beyond the plantations to touch entire communities and even neighboring towns where people who had never seen her felt the weight of her presence in their own homes and fields. Stories circulated of travelers hearing soft footsteps at night or glimpsing a small shadowy figure darting between trees and disappearing before anyone could identify it, and each retelling added layers of fear and mystery to her tale. Parents warned children not to wander alone near old abandoned plantations and described her as a reminder that unseen forces could strike at any moment, and that death could arrive silently and without reason. Ministers and local leaders spoke quietly about her during sermons and meetings, using her story as an example of the dangers of the unknown and the importance of caution and vigilance, even in mundane daily life. Some claimed that the land itself seemed cursed after her departure. Crops failed inexplicably, livestock died without explanation, and workers became ill, and these events were always tied in people's minds to her lingering shadow. Oral traditions ensured that every generation remembered her, and her name became synonymous with fear, mystery, and unexplained deaths as parents passed down warnings and detailed accounts from their elders. Even historians who tried to separate fact from fiction admitted that no record could fully capture the terror she inspired or the way her presence seemed to echo across time and space, and that the story was now a permanent fixture in the culture of Louisiana. The girl had become more than a person. She had become a symbol of the unknowable, the uncontrollable, and the dangerous forces that could exist hidden within ordinary life, and the mystery surrounding her actions and disappearance continued to haunt the memories and imaginations of everyone who heard the tale. The 14th part of the story shows how the fear inspired by the girl evolved into a superstition that shaped daily life and social behavior across generations, and even influenced decisions about property, work, and relationships on the plantations she had touched. People became hyper-aware of small movements in the shadows, and every unexplained sound in the dead of night was attributed to her presence, and workers hesitated to walk alone to the fields or storage sheds long after she had vanished. Families marked certain rooms and corners as unsafe and refused to sleep or work near them, believing that her shadow lingered and would take another life if provoked or ignored. Travelers passing through the region reported that locals warned them in quiet, urgent tones about areas to avoid, and described the girl not just as a person, but as a force that could follow anyone who ignored the warnings or entered forbidden places. Even simple chores became filled with caution and ritual, with people checking doors, windows, and surroundings repeatedly, and performing small protective actions to ward off any lingering influence she might have left behind. Children grew up hearing tales of the girl and learned to react with fear and respect at the slightest hint of strange sounds or movement, because her story had become a moral lesson about the consequences of disregarding unknown dangers. Over time, the superstitions became intertwined with local culture and customs, and the girl's name was invoked whenever misfortune struck, to explain the unexplainable, and to remind people that some forces could not be tamed, contained, or understood. Scholars and historians studying the region noticed the pervasive influence of her legend, noting how deeply it affected behavior, social norms, and even decisions about property and work patterns, and that the fear she inspired had outlasted her physical presence by decades. The story of the girl evolved from an account of violent deaths into a living cautionary tale shaping both the physical and psychological landscape of Louisiana long after she vanished.